shut the door to immigrants, build the wall, are going to get behind that and be trying to defend him. And so when this other stuff comes out, he will have these people fired up over there. That's my theory on what's going on. Take it or leave it. I don't know. I can't prove any of it, but that's just seems to me like an obvious thing, because he's pushing so hard. He wants to make something big happen. So obviously closing the border would be a huge deal, or closing any part of the border would be a huge deal. And things would blow up left and right. There'd be explosions. Not literally, but you know what I mean. Or maybe literally, who knows. But, it would be such a big dramatic event that bad but not necessarily incriminating stuff from the Mueller report, or let's say incriminating but not necessarily conclusive stuff that leaks out from the Mueller report, would kind of get brushed aside. Tax stuff kind of brushed aside. So it really, I think it's pretty obvious what's going on. But even so, it's seriously concerning, because that someone is so afraid of facts coming out. I mean, let's admit it. This is the guy who does not want anybody to see his tax records, threatened people to keep them from releasing his student records when he was a student, and doesn't want anybody to see reports on illegal behavior. That's pretty serious that this guy's trying to cover that stuff up. The fact that there's so many Republicans who are either going along with this or just kind of like pretending, I don't know, we can't do anything. It's not as serious as it seems. That's what's serious to me. Is I guess collusion is the word. I mean, that was the word that was trying to come out of my mouth there, and I think that's what it is. The Republicans generally are colluding with the president. Basically, he's offering, I'll give you all your judges, I'll give you, your pet issues, tax cuts for the rich, whatever you want, I'll give you that stuff. Just keep the law off my back. And so I don't go to jail. And they're going, okay, it sounds like a good deal to us. I think that's pretty serious. And I think that anybody at this point who votes for any Republican has to really ask themselves, what are they doing? What is it you think you're supporting at this point? I know that's a pretty serious statement to make, but I don't see how to look around that. I mean, I don't see how you can, at this point, support, if there was genuine pushback within the party and a genuine search for truth and a genuine belief in justice, if any of that were going on in any measurable way, I would say, okay, choose who you want to vote for. But at this point, we have a criminal in every possible way. Every possible way you can describe that word is the President of the United States. And that's really serious. That's not something to just blow off. I don't know. I mean, it's serious. It's very, very serious. And I keep running out of ways of saying it without, actually sitting here and stomping around and calling for revolution. I'm not saying we need that. We just need people to start believing in something that together. Does that make sense? Like, if we all just say, okay, what do we believe in? What do we stand for? Who are we as a nation? Let's start with some basics and then build up from there slowly. So what is our main belief? All people are created equal? Well, apparently not, because there's a whole lot of people saying that only some people are created equal and everybody else is not. We need to reestablish some bedrock principles so that we can say, all right, this is what we all believe together. Across the political spectrum, we have these basic set of beliefs. Now, how do we go about supporting them? How do we go about defending them? What is our next step? And I think we've lost it. I think we've just gone far enough from the beginnings of the country that whatever sort of coherent, shared philosophy there may have ever been is just now turned into a bunch of words that people only refer to when they're trying to support their current position on something. So you have all these people saying, well, I'm a constitutional conservative, and then they go about and stomp all over the Constitution in their attempts to stamp conservatism all over things. They're only constitutional when it's convenient. And on the other side, too, I'll admit there are people on the liberal spectrum who are also support only laws that agree with them. I mean, there are people all over that do that, but finding a shared set of values, I think, would go a long way towards helping us untangle some of these things, and we just don't seem to have that, and it's very sad. Okay, I have more stuff here. So this is an older article, but I think it is relevant. So it reads, there's been a bomb cyclone of revelations from and about the White House since New Year's Day. Okay, that's pretty old. But there's a pattern. It all stems from President Trump's contempt for the rule of law. The week began with a tweet from the president that in a quasi-normal political environment would have led to an impeachment investigation. And then he references a tweet where Trump is talking about locking up political enemies. And then he goes on to say, Richard Nixon earned eternal disgrace for keeping a list of his political enemies, but he at least was ashamed enough of the practice to know that he had to keep it secret. Trump, in contrast, is openly calling for the Department of Justice, which he controls, to put his political opponents in jail. This kind of behavior is a trademark of the authoritarians he admires, like Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan. I don't know how you say Tayyip. Anyway, it would be disgraceful under any circumstances, but it's especially grotesque given that there's no evidence that Huma Abedin, is who the tweet was about, did anything unlawful. A newly reopened investigation of the Clinton Foundation represents another attempt by the administration to use law enforcement to harass his opponents. In a similar vein, congressional Republicans last week invited the Justice Department to investigate Christopher Steele, the British former intelligence official who compiled an early dossier on potential contacts between Trump and Russia. Also last week, the Times reported more evidence suggesting that the president had obstructed justice in connection with the FBI's investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 election and any possible connection to members of the Trump family. In March, according to the Times, Trump sent Donald F. McGahn II, the White House counsel, to urge Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, not to recuse himself from supervising the investigation. Trump did so because he felt that Sessions should be protecting him. Where's my Roy Cohn? Trump asked, referring to the right-wing gargoyle who was one of his early political mentors. Sessions, a key figure in the Trump campaign, recognized the obvious fact that he could not investigate the Trump campaign and properly rebuffed McGahn. But Trump's malign obsession with the Russian case remains a touchstone of his presidency. The Times revelation makes an obstruction case stronger. Trump asked for loyalty from James Comey, the FBI director, who was supervising the investigation. When Comey equivocated, Trump fired him, then put out a false story for why he did so, which he promptly undermined by admitting the real reason. And when emails emerged over the summer showing that Donald Trump Jr. had met during the campaign with a Russian lawyer offering dirt on Hillary Clinton, the president participated in concocting a bogus story to explain them. An especially incriminating version of Trump's role in the email cover story appears in Fire and Fury, Michael Wolff's explosive book. Where am I? Trump's contempt for the rule of law infects his entire administration, as illustrated by Sessions' newly announced guidance on marijuana policy. Under President Barack Obama, the Department of Justice allowed states to come up with their own policies on pot, which Washington and Colorado legalized to benign effect. Not surprisingly, more states are following those successful experiments. Still, Sessions this week invited local United States attorneys to make up their own policies on when and whether to prosecute marijuana cases. This would be a recipe for chaos in any circumstances, but it's especially appalling because Trump was nominated and the Senate has confirmed so few U.S. attorneys. There are positions for 93 U.S. attorneys, but Trump has nominated people to fill only 58 of them, and the Senate has confirmed just 46. But under the new policy, in much of the country, federal marijuana enforcement will be run by officials who are only accountable to Sessions and Trump, not to the broader public. Senators have a right to ask prospective U.S. attorneys how they plan to enforce federal laws on marijuana, and of course, the legislators have the right to vote those officials down if they don't like their answers. But Sessions has installed acting U.S. attorneys in much of the country, including in such high-profile locations as Manhattan and Los Angeles, and senators can't exert any oversight of them. This gesture of contempt for the Senate's role in confirmations is reflected well beyond the Justice Department. Throughout the government, Trump has nominated many fewer officials to Senate-confirmed positions than his predecessors. Instead, cabinet secretaries have filled these crucial positions with acting or temporary officials who avoided scrutiny from senators. It's another example of Trump's disdain for the norms that have been observed by his predecessors. Trump's presidency may look like a series of chaotic lurches, but there is, alas, madness to his method. So this is an older bit, but it points to a pattern, a pattern that is very dangerous. So I'm running out of time here, but I wanted to at least start reading this next bit. This is from the Harvard Law Review, but it points to something that's going on, since this show is about immigration, something that's been going on here that is a problem, and it is only getting worse under the current administration. Excuse me. And I think it is important to keep these things in mind, because a lot of the stuff that goes on. So we hear the big things. We hear Trump says this policy has changed, this explosion happened, this person was murdered. You know, we hear these things. We don't hear a lot of what goes on that creates the situation where these things happen. That kind of news is hard to report because it's about things that are sort of happening, but nothing that has happened. And it's hard to get a grip on. So this is entitled Segregation by Citizenship. It's by Emma Kaufman, and I think it's very interesting. So it reads as follows. For centuries, prisoners in the United States were housed together regardless of their citizenship status. That changed in 1999 when the federal government began to send non-citizens into separate prisons. Today, tens of thousands of people, more than half of all non-citizens in federal prison, live in an institution segregated by citizenship. The vast majority of these people are Mexican nationals. Nearly all of them are Latino. The rise of the all-foreign prison raises pressing questions about federal immigration power and non-citizens' equal protection rights. Yet no legal scholarship examines these unusual institutions. Few even know they exist. Drawing on extensive data from the Bureau of Prisons, internal agency documents, interviews, and other primary sources, this article provides the first account of the all-foreign prison. It notes that these prisons are insulated from meaningful judicial review by an alienage jurisprudence that affords deference to any federal policy characterized as migration control. And it critiques this doctrine, arguing that courts need a more coherent and defensible conception of the relationship between national sovereignty and non-citizens' equal protection rights. To that end, this article advances a simple claim. Only core immigration activities, setting rules on entry, exit, and naturalization, should count as migration control. Other species of state action, including segregating foreign national prisoners, may affect where and how immigrants live their lives, but they are not the kind of migration control that warrants deference from federal courts. The introduction. Immigration and prisons are two of the most fraught issues in American society. Every day, headlines announce new turns in national debates over which immigrants to admit and what to do about the country's bloated prisons and jails. Today, roughly 2.3 million people live in a custodial institution. 1 in 3 non-citizens is deportable, and it is increasingly difficult that tell the difference between policing crime and regulating the border. Yet at the most acute point of overlap between immigration and imprisonment, we know next to nothing. Despite enormous public interest in the fate of foreign criminals, legal scholars have paid scant attention to non-citizens inside American prisons. Instead, those who study the intersection of criminal and immigration law tend to focus on the front end of the justice system, on legislatures, police, prosecutors, and courts. This framework downplays the prison's central role in American immigration policy. It also obscures a remarkable development in American prison history. For nearly 2 centuries, prisoners in the United States were housed together regardless of their citizenship status. Prison officials have long documented prisoners' nationalities. Prison records include prisoners' nativity as far back as 1850. But until recently, citizenship had little to do with where prisoners were held. That changed in the 1990s when the Federal Bureau of Prisons, or the BOP, began to send non-citizens into separate, segregated prisons. Initially, the all-foreign prisons were an isolated experiment in Central California and western New Mexico. Soon, however, this model of incarceration spread. There are now 10 all-foreign prisons across 7 states, and the Trump administration has announced plans to build more. These prisons hold people serving criminal sentences for a range of offenses, including drug, violent, and other non-immigration crimes. These are, in other words, criminal penal institutions, not civil immigration detention centers. On any given day, they house roughly 19,000 people. To put that figure in perspective, 10% of all federal prisoners and more than half of all non-citizens in federal prison live in an institution segregated by citizenship. The vast majority of these people are Mexican nationals. Nearly all of them are Latino. The rise of the all-foreign prison raises pressing questions about the purpose of punishment, the relationship between citizenship and race, and the rights of non-citizens inside the United States. Yet no legal scholarship examines this peculiar form of imprisonment. Few even know these prisons exist. Sorry? Yeah. Sorry. These prisons exist. I lost my place. Yeah. This article offers the first assessment of America's all-foreign prisons, drawing on a wide range of sources, including archival materials, legal opinions, federal regulations, private prison contracts, penal policies, interviews, and previously undisclosed data obtained from the Bureau of Prisons through the Freedom of Information Act. It documents the birth of the all-foreign prison. It critiques the legal framework that enables these institutions, and it grapples with the practical and normative implications of a prison system stratified by alienage. The article's core claim is that, in the name of migration control, prison officials have built a second-class system of punishment for non-citizens. All foreign prisons are not only places where foreigners are separated from the rest of the penal population, they are also stripped-down institutions with fewer services than other federal prisons. This is no accident. Under current prison regulations, which emerged alongside the all-foreign prisons in the 1990s, non-citizens are exempt from education requirements, excluded from drug treatment and job training programs, and ineligible for placement in minimum security prisons, transfer close to their homes, and early release. Together, these policies have turned non-citizens into a distinct class of prisoners and encouraged prison officials to funnel foreign nationals into remote prisons with fewer resources. At first glance, a system of separate and unequal prisons for foreigners, almost all of whom are people of color, seems like a straightforward violation of equal protection law. This is, after all, state-sponsored segregation of a suspect class. Non-citizens are a classic, discrete, and insular minority, unrepresented in the political process and long subject to prejudice and restrictive legislation. The Supreme Court has held, moreover, that the practice of segregating prisoners by race or ethnicity deserves strict scrutiny. It would be easy to add alienage to this list, but all foreign prisons sit at the intersection of 2 powerful lines of deference, which warp traditional equality doctrines. First, in cases involving alienage, courts defer to federal policies that distinguish citizens from foreign nationals on the theory that the federal government has expansive authority to regulate immigration. This rule, known as the plenary power doctrine, entitles all foreign prisons to deference as federal institutions. Second, in cases involving prisons, courts routinely defer to penal policies that restrict prisoners' rights, including the right to equal protection, on the ground that prisons are difficult institutions to run. This rule, which I call the penal power doctrine, enables all foreign prisons to deference, entitles all foreign prisons to deference because they are prisons. Scholars have critiqued these doctrines, but have rarely considered how they interact. This is a significant omission in a legal system that polices migration through its prisons. In practice, two discrete deference regimes, one from immigration law, the other prison law, combine to give federal prison officials broad latitude to determine how and where non-citizens can be punished. The model of punishment they have chosen has concerning consequences. To highlight one, isolating foreign nationals introduces widespread ethnic segregation into the federal prison system. The prisoners in all foreign facilities are overwhelmingly and disproportionately Latino. In recent years, prison officials have described the all-foreign prison population as very homogeneous and primarily Mexican. The Bureau of Prisons' internal data show that Latino non-citizens are significantly more likely than non-Latino non-citizens to be held in segregated prisons. And, as this article uncovers, the Bureau referred to the precursor to the all-foreign prison, a set of specialized intake and release prisons for non-citizens, as facilities, quote, targeted at the Mexican citizens, end quote. These statements raise the specter of profiling and aggravate the concern that American prison policy serves to identify and manage disfavored groups. All foreign prisons also raise a basic question about the scope of the federal immigration power. Prison officials describe these prisons as a way to support federal immigration authorities, and these institutions developed from a decade-long effort to integrate the Bureau of Prisons with what was then called the Immigration and Naturalization Service, or the INS, and is now Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. But there is little evidence that all foreign prisons facilitate deportation, and good reason to insist that these prisons are not sites of migration control. The latter point is the critical one. Under current equal protection doctrine, courts defer to any federal policy characterized as migration control, no matter who crafted it or how little it relates to the government's ability to regulate national borders. Courts draw no distinctions between the many federal actors that make alienage policy. This means, for example, that prisons, wardens, civil servants, park rangers, officials in the Department of Health and Human Services, Congress, and the President can all lay claim to the federal immigration power and to the deference that comes with it. This is a crude way to allocate an extraordinary constitutional power. Governing alienage jurisprudence ignores the deep puzzle of immigration law. Non-citizens are at once unequal and entitled to equal protection, even when the federal government acts. To make sense of that puzzle, courts need a better theory of migration control, one that distinguishes punishment from immigration regulation and limits when federal actors can invoke the immigration power to justify their policies. To that end, here we go. This article defends a simple idea. Only core immigration activities, setting rules on entry, exit, and naturalization, should count as migration control. Other species of state action, including segregating foreign national prisoners, may affect where and how immigrants live their lives, but they are not migration control, at least insofar as the Constitution is concerned. The article advances this argument in 4 parts. Part 1 describes how the all-foreign prison transformed from a pilot project into a web of separate prisons for non-citizens. Part 2 catalogs the consequences of this new prison system. Part 3 explores the constitutional framework that governs all foreign prisons. Part 4 contends that this framework is misguided and explains why all foreign prisons cannot be justified as an instance of migration control. In mapping this terrain, this article makes several contributions. Perhaps most important, it presents the only data of its kind on non-citizen prisoners, a largely hidden population, and provides the first comprehensive account of the prison's role in immigration enforcement. Penal institutions are often overlooked in immigration scholarship, which tends to emphasize cooperation between ICE agents and the police. Yet prisons were the primary site of enforcement when the pace of deportations began to rise in the 1980s. 3 decades later, prison-based enforcement initiatives account for nearly half of all immigrant apprehensions, more than most other immigration enforcement programs combined. This article aims to shift focus to the post-conviction criminal justice system, where prisons are a critical part of America's deportation regime. In doing so, this article brings citizenship to the foreground of debates about punishment. Scholars have long documented the relationship between prisons and both racial and economic inequality. Academics have described mass imprisonment as the new Jim Crow, as a means to warehouse people of color, and as a way to punish the poor. Criminal law scholars have written less about citizenship. To be sure, all foreign prisons are only one small piece of mass incarceration, but over the last 20 years, prison officials have turned alienage into an organizing principle for the federal prison system. This development deserves attention as scholars consider what prisons are for. Finally, this article advances an ongoing debate about executive authority to make immigration law. For decades, legal scholarship on immigration focused on federalism, on whether states can regulate migration, when federal priorities preempt state immigration laws, and whether preemption claims better protect immigrants' rights than challenges arising from equal protection law. With the emergence and rescission of high-profile programs like deferred action for childhood arrivals, this conversation has begun to shift to the federal level, and in particular to question about the distribution of immigration power between the President and Congress. This article embraces that shift and offers a critical assessment of immigration enforcement within the executive branch. In an era of administration governance, the most pressing questions about citizenship concern how agencies interact, what authorities they possess, and when the Constitution limits the federal government's power to discriminate against non-citizens. Okay, I have run out of time, but this is very interesting. I'll try to continue this at some point. The overarching point of this show is that the law is being, as we've seen in many instances, is being pushed. When it can't be ignored, it's being pushed by the president and his little group. And this is being allowed by a party that is willing to bend a lot of rules in order to get what it wants. And we, as people who are confined to laws, we are confined by laws, are the pawns in this game, and we need to be very concerned. And those of us who care about immigration need to be concerned. So I've got to go. We'll see you next time. Bye.